Your Honor, we could briefly, the first witness for the state is Jamari Cook. We could briefly talk about his priors if the court wanted to.
That's fine. All right, we're returned on the case of the state against Daniel J. Tate, and the appearances are as before. And Mr. Gridley?
Your Honor, the first witness the state intends to call is Jamari Cook. We have looked through his prior record. I believe him to have one juvenile adjudication from 2015. That offense is the offense of graffiti. He was on supervision for 9 months for that offense. So that is the only prior. I assume the court typically may allow juvenile adjudications. If that's the case, then I am prepared to instruct Mr. Cook that he would be able to indicate he's been adjudicated on one prior occasion.
Did you want to be heard? I would tell you that I probably would not admit a juvenile graffiti.
I guess the only thing from our standpoint is just because Mr. Cook is quite young, the only type of prior convictions are likely going to be of a juvenile sort, and so we would ask that it be admitted.
Yeah, you're right, but there's a reason we handle the juvenile cases separately. And given the nature of the offense, if we're a crime of dishonesty of some sort, I don't doubt that I would look at it differently, but with a graffiti offense, I'm not going to admit it.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll instruct I'll instruct the witness. I briefly need to show the witness a couple of marked exhibits that obviously I didn't have an opportunity to prep him with, but that should take 5 minutes, and then we'd be prepared to start.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We'll continue with the state's case this morning, and Mr. Gravely, or Ms. Cortera.
Your Honor, before we call the next witness, the state would move State's Exhibit 51 into evidence. It's the autopsy photos from yesterday.
Objection?
No objection.
Received.
And, Your Honor, the state then would call Jamari Cook to the stand. Should he be brought in from the back here, Judge?
Yeah, that's
Circle around.
Whichever side, I don't care.
I don't know if the deputy knows.
Yeah.
So, does he need to raise his right hand?
No, just him.
Please, just I swear the testimony about to give this matter be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
You may be seated.
Mr. Cook, I need you to speak directly into that microphone. Okay, the sound here is very difficult. Can you state your first and your last name and spell both your names for the record, please?
My name is Jamari Cook, Jamaricook.
And Mr. Cook, how old are you today?
18.
And back on July 23rd, 2017, how old were you?
17.
And what is the last grade you completed in school?
11th.
And back in July of 2017, what grade had you completed by then?
11th.
And what was the last high school that you attended?
Bradford.
Now, I'm going to turn your attention to, first of all, your current situation. Are you incarcerated in the jail?
I am.
And are you a co-defendant in a criminal case with another individual?
I am.
And is that why you're in jail today?
It is.
And is the person that you are a co-defendant with, in other words, charged with the same course of conduct, is that person here in the courtroom today?
He is.
Can you point out where that person is and state what they're wearing today?
A maroon shirt.
Pointing at the accused.
And Mr. Cook, when you referred to that individual during the period of July 2017, what name did you use for that individual?
Danny.
And did you agree to testify today against the defendant here in court?
I did.
And have you been provided any deals in exchange for that? In other words, has anyone made you any specific promises about something happening for you?
They have not.
Are you hoping that if you testify against the defendant that that will be to some advantage to you?
I am.
But has anybody promised you that?
No.
Back on July 23rd of 2017, what was your relationship with the defendant?
It was my best friend.
And how long had the defendant been your best friend on July 23rd, 2017?
Roughly 6 years.
So that would put you back in middle school?
Yeah.
Is that yes?
Sir.
And on July 23rd, 2017, did you know by name a person named Olivia McKay?
Not by name.
Did you know her by face, by recognizing her?
I know that she went to school with me.
And where did Olivia McKay go to school with you?
Indian Trail.
Now, you indicated that you have known the defendant for 6 years. How long would you describe him as your best friend up until July 23rd, 2017?
From the day we met?
For that whole 6-year period?
Yeah.
And on July 23rd, 2017, did you know specifically where the defendant was staying?
Not specifically.
Were you able to discover where he was staying on that date based on you're seeing him?
I was.
And on July 23rd, 2017, where did you find the defendant to be staying?
At his grandmother's house.
And do you know his grandmother's name?
Patsy.
Do you know her last name?
Tate.
And where did the defendant's grandmother live that you knew to be Patsy Tate?
On Sheridan.
Okay. Would that be on 46th and Sheridan?
It could be. I don't know the exact street.
All right. Is it right across from or right next to a business?
It is.
What business?
I can't remember what it's called.
Okay.
I know
And-
that across the street from it, there's shenanigans on Sheridan.
Okay. And Mr. Cook, on July 23rd, 2017, did you come in contact with the defendant in the evening hours?
I did.
And why did you happen to have contact with him in the evening hours?
I had left my girlfriend's house because I had gotten into an argument with her stepdad,
And what was your girlfriend's name at that time?
Kaylee Lalonde.
And previous to that, had your plan been to stay at her house that night?
It was.
And after that argument, where were you hoping you would stay the night?
At Mata's.
At Mata's, and who is Mata?
Patsy.
So that's a name that you call Patsy Tate, the person we've spoken about?
That's her nickname, yeah.
Okay. So if you say Mata, you mean Patsy Tate?
Yes.
Is Patsy Tate, is Mata related to you in any way?
She is not.
Are you by blood related to the defendant in any way?
I'm not.
So after you had the argument over at Kaylee's house and headed elsewhere, where did you go next?
To Mata's.
All right, and when you got to Mata's or Patsy Tate's house, what, if anything, can you say about whether the defendant was there?
He was sitting on the porch.
And when you began to speak to the defendant, did he tell you what his plans were for the evening?
He said he was going to hang out with a girl.
Did he tell you the girl's name at that time?
He did not.
And did he tell you what the arrangements were? In other words, how he would come to meet up with her, what was going on, any of those details?
He said that she was going to come to the house.
Okay. And at that point, did you have further plans for the evening?
I did not.
So after hearing that the defendant had plans with a girl who was going to meet up with him, what, if anything, did the two of you decide then? Meaning you and the defendant.
I asked if it would be all right if I hung out with him because I didn't want to go back to Kaylee's house.
And what did the defendant tell you regarding that?
He said that was fine.
And if you know, did the defendant in some way make that possible in terms of any contact with the person who was coming to see him?
He had messaged Olivia and asked her if it was all right.
So, how long were you at the defendant's home before someone came who appeared to be part of that plan that he had described, that he was going to meet up with someone that night?
Roughly 10 to 15 minutes.
And during that period of time, where were you? Outside, indoors, where were you?
On the porch.
And during that time, did you consume any alcohol?
I did.
What did you consume?
A beer.
And what, if anything, did the defendant consume?
Half of a beer.
And at that time, did you observe him take any other alcohol at that period of time?
Did not.
And did you take any other alcohol at that period of time?
I drank the other half of his beer.
Okay. At some point, did someone arrive at in that general location?
Yeah.
And what do you remember about how that person arrived?
Olivia pulled down the street and messaged Danny to ask if that was him on the porch.
And how did she get there?
In her car.
And what do you remember about the vehicle?
It was a silver Pontiac.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 22. I'm going to ask you to look up there and tell me, does that appear to be a car you recognize?
It does.
And what is that car in the context of what we talked about?
That's the car Olivia pulled up in.
When she pulled up, who was with her?
Nobody.
And who was with you at the time that she pulled up?
Danny.
When you and Danny saw her and she messaged or somehow got in touch with Danny, how was he receiving those messages?
Facebook.
Was he using a tablet, a computer? How was he receiving the messages?
His cell phone.
And is this a phone that you knew Danny to have at that time?
It was.
And did Danny have any other way that in your time with him he commonly was receiving Facebook communication other than the phone that you saw him with?
I do not recognize any other phone or device.
So after Danny messaged after the defendant messaged the person in this vehicle, did you have occasion then to see what that vehicle you've identified did next?
Parked across the street.
When the vehicle parked across the street, what did you do?
Walked over to the car and got in.
And what did the defendant do?
Walked to the car and get in.
And when you got in, did you feel that the person who was in the vehicle was familiar to you?
Not initially.
Not initially? Okay. Where did you get into the vehicle?
The rear driver's side.
So that would be right behind the driver?
It is.
And where did the defendant get in the vehicle?
Passenger side.
So that would be in the front seats of the vehicle?
It was.
And at that point, is the individual who was driving, did that person eventually become familiar to you?
She did.
And how did she become familiar to you? What do you recall about how you eventually felt that that person was familiar?
I asked her what school she went to, and she said she went to Indian Trails. And then I told her that I recognized her from one of my classes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 6 in this case. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Cook, if you see anybody in that checkout who you recognize in the context of this incident.
I do.
And if you can point on the picture for the jury, can you point out which person that you recognize? Okay. And where do you recognize that person in the picture from?
School and from that night.
Is that the person you're speaking of that was the driver of this vehicle?
She was.
At that point, did you learn her name was Olivia?
I did.
Prior to that information being made available to you in the car, did you know the person who you had gone to Indian Trail with, did you know her by name?
I did not.
When you first saw Olivia in the vehicle, describe how she was acting.
She was quiet.
And describe how you were acting.
Quiet.
And describe how the defendant was acting.
Quiet.
Up until this period of time, when you saw Olivia in the vehicle, had you had any contact with Olivia in person other than knowing her by face from a class at Indian Trail?
I did not.
Had you had any contact with Olivia in any way over Facebook?
I did not.
Had you had any phone contact or any social media contact with Olivia in any way prior to July 23rd, 2017?
I did not.
Now, after all three of you were in the vehicle, what's the next thing that happened in terms of Olivia and the vehicle?
She drove down by the lake.
To the lake in Kenosha?
That's correct.
And in general, where do you remember driving to?
By the band show.
Okay. And at that time, did anyone get out of the vehicle?
No.
Did the vehicle stop by the band shell?
No.
Did not? And you have to say yes or no.
No, it did not.
And at that point, what was the conversation between the parties in the car?
There wasn't much other than me asking her what school she went to, and then we asked her to play music.
And did she play music?
She did.
Was that on the, how was she playing it? She was using what to play music?
The radio.
And were you requesting the type of music, or was the defendant? How was music decided in that vehicle?
It just played. She said that we probably wouldn't like the music she listened to, and we said that we just wanted to hear it.
Was there any conversation, what if any conversation was there about why there was no stop at the band shell at this time?
There wasn't any.
Okay. Where, if anywhere, did the vehicle, did Olivia proceed next?
It's Racine.
Who was driving the vehicle at this time?
Olivia.
And how was the decision made to go to Racine, if you know?
She said where we wanted to go, and we said just drive around.
How did you proceed to Racine at that time?
She drove.
And which, if you know, what route did you take? Which of the roads that get to Racine did you guys use?
Sheridan Road.
Sheridan? And when you went down Sheridan, where did you go in Racine that you remember?
Down by the marina.
And how long were you down there?
We just drove past it.
And did anyone get out of the vehicle?
No.
Did anyone come to a stop in the vehicle?
No.
And other than Olivia, did anyone else drive the vehicle during this period of time?
No.
Where did the vehicle proceed after Racine?
Back to Kenosha.
And what route, if you know, to get back to Kenosha did the vehicle drive, or did it when it left?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? And where did the vehicle next go to?
Back to the band show.
Who was driving at this point?
Olivia.
So the vehicle went directly from Racine to the band shell, or were there any stops along the way?
Directly from Racine to the band show.
At the time that you got back to the band shell, was how long had you been with Olivia and the defendant in the vehicle?
I can't say for sure.
What would be your estimate?
20 minutes to half an hour.
To get there and back, Racine and back? Yeah. And during that period of time, did any other individuals ever join the three of you in that vehicle?
They did not.
And how was it decided to go to the band shell on this occasion when you got back?
Danny had said that somebody who owed him money would meet us at the band show.
This is the defendant saying that?
It is.
Who was he speaking to?
Me. Both me and Olivia.
Okay, and how was Olivia caused to go to the band shell at that time? Based on that, why did she proceed to the band shell, if you know?
He asked her to go by the band shell, and she agreed.
When you say he, who asked her?
Danny.
That's the defendant?
It is.
And did he state the reason to her why, meaning this collection of money?
It was just money that he was owed.
And had you heard about this money being owed up until now?
I did not.
So when you were with Danny before Olivia arrived, had he ever told you that part of what he was doing was meeting up with somebody at the band shell?
He did not.
Or that he was collecting money that night?
He did not.
And Mr. Cook, had you ever left the defendant's side between the time that you arrived at his porch and the time that you proceeded then to the band shell for the second time that night?
I did not.
And during that period of time, had you ever, after leaving the porch, had you ever stopped at any location?
We did not.
And what, if anything, do you know about the defendant's phone during that period of time that would lead you to know whether the defendant was in touch with anyone during the time you guys were in the vehicle with Olivia?
He has no internet and his phone is turned off, so he wouldn't have been able to message anybody.
So, if I understand you correctly, you know, based on what Danny's ability was with his phone, that no one could have contacted him during this period of time you were in the car. Is that right?
That's correct.
Because you were never in a Wi-Fi area where it was activated?
That's correct.
So, Mr. Cook, there's this new information that now there's going to be a stop at the band shell because there's money being collected. What was your impression of that? Did that seem weird to you that this is now going on?
It did, because I knew that he couldn't contact anybody at the time.
Did you say anything? Did you say, hey, what's going on, or this is weird?
No, I presumed that he had already had it set up that he would pick the money up.
So, where did Olivia park her vehicle at the band shell at this period of time?
In the parking lot.
Now, you've described an area by the band shell. I'm just going to show you a picture marked State's Exhibit 14. I'm going to ask you if you recognize that building in context of what we're talking about, in the general area you guys were parking at the moment you're speaking of.
I do.
What is that area?
That's the band show.
So that's the area of Kenosha you're talking about?
It is.
So when Olivia parked, did she park on the side of the street towards the band shell or a different direction if you look at this exhibit?
She parked reverse of the image in the parking lot facing the lake.
Facing the lake. And at that time, did anyone direct Olivia where specifically to park?
No.
So you and Olivia had been provided information that Danny needed to be at the band shell to pick up money that was owed. Is that correct?
It is.
And was there anyone there to meet you?
No.
And when there was no one there to meet you, what happened next?
He said that we were going to wait by the lake.
When you say he, who said that?
Danny.
And when the defendant said that you were going to meet by the lake or wait by the lake, what happened next?
We walked towards the water.
Who walked towards the water?
The three of us.
So please indicate who the three were who walked towards the water.
Me, Danny, and Olivia.
And why were you to walk over by the water if there was a reason?
He said that we could go by the water while we waited.
What happened next?
Danny and Olivia started talking.
And where are Danny and Olivia when they started talking in the way you're talking about? Are they in the parking lot, on the grass, in the sand, all the way into the lake? Where are they?
In the sand.
And then what happened?
I walked away
Why did you walk away?
to give him space,
And when you walked away, what were you doing?
listening to music on my phone.
At some point when you walked away, did your attention go back to where Danny and Olivia were located?
It did.
And how long would you say it was from the point that you first got out and headed over to the beach to the point that you now look over at them again? How much time has gone by?
Between 5 and 10 minutes.
And when you look back over, what do you see going on now?
Danny standing behind Olivia.
Behind her? And then what happens?
He has her in a headlock.
When you say he, who has someone in a headlock?
Danny.
And he has who in a headlock?
Olivia.
And when you saw that headlock, what was occurring?
What do you mean?
Well, what was happening to Olivia?
She was being choked.
I'm going to come up to you. I'm going to ask you to indicate to me, I know you have handcuffs on, but can you indicate to me which of his hands that you believe were involved in the headlock? Were both hands or one hand?
I know that his right arm was under her chin. I don't know what his left arm was doing.
And what was Olivia doing at the point that the defendant had her in a headlock from behind?
Nothing.
Were you concerned?
Initially, yeah.
What was concerning?
But that's not something you normally do with somebody.
And then what did you see?
I looked away
Why?
because nothing was happening other than her in a headlock, which she wasn't doing anything, so I didn't think it was that serious.
How far away would you say you were when this was occurring?
I originally said 10 feet, but it was more than 10 feet. I was confused.
Okay, so was it further away than you are to me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to keep walking. You tell me where you think the distance was. Was it further than I am right now?
Yes.
Is it further than I am currently?
No.
Should I come closer?
That's about the distance.
This is about the distance.
Yes.
And from that vantage point, originally you took no action when you saw the headlock. Is that right?
I did not.
And you looked away.
I did.
Did you look back?
Yes.
And when you looked back, what did you see?
I looked back because I heard a splash.
And what was happening between the defendant and Olivia when you saw the splash?
Olivia was in the water and Danny was on her back.
And how did Olivia get into the water? What did the defendant do?
He slammed her into the water.
And when you say the water, do you mean the lake itself?
No.
So describe what you mean by the water.
There was a pool of water in the sand,
Connected to the whole lake or separate from the lake?
separate from the lake.
In the sand, in the grass, where was this pool of water?
Sand.
And when the defendant slammed Olivia to the ground, was there, how would you describe the amount of force being used to do that?
I didn't see the slam
Okay? So how do you know there was a slam?
because I heard her splash into the water.
And then what happened?
Danny was holding her head in the water.
Holding her head to stop her from getting wet?
No.
How was he holding her head? How was the defendant holding her head?
Holding her head down into the water.
Pressing her head into the water?
Yes.
And what part of his body was he using to press her hand into the water?
His hands and his knee.
And where did he use his knees to accomplish this?
In her back.
And where were you in terms of distance at that time?
Same distance.
You hadn't gotten any closer?
No, I did not.
When you saw this occurring, Mr. Cook, what did you do?
Nothing.
Why did you do nothing?
I was confused.
What do you mean?
I was in shock. It didn't seem real.
Then what happened?
And Danny got up and grabbed something off the ground and wrapped it around her neck.
Do you know what it was he grabbed? And when Danny, the defendant, took that item, what did he do with it?
Wrapped it around her neck.
And did he tie it completely around so that it made a noose out of it, or no?
No.
So how did he stretch the item in the area of the neck of Olivia?
He wrapped it around her neck.
All the way around or just over part of her neck?
Just the front.
And was Olivia face up or down at this time?
Face down.
And was she lying down or seated or standing? How was she situated?
Lying down.
And how was the defendant situated?
Kneeling over.
And when the defendant put that item around the front of the neck of Olivia, what did he do next?
Hold on it.
And what, if anything, did that do to the body of Olivia?
She bent backwards.
What did you see next?
Him let go.
And then what happened?
She twitched. That was before the cloth where he choked her.
That was before what?
Where he choked her with the cloth.
The twitch was before that?
Yes.
Then what happened, Mr. Cook?
He grabbed her by her hair and pulled her out of the water.
By her hair?
Yes, sir.
And how far did he have to pull her to get her out of the water?
Not far. 3 feet.
Had you come any closer by now?
No, I did not.
Then what happened?
He started dragging her.
Who started dragging her?
Danny.
And was that an easy process that he was able to drag her, or was that a difficult process?
Difficult.
Why are you able to say it was difficult to drag her?
Because it wasn't a fluid motion, he kept yanking.
And when he was dragging Olivia at this point, was the terrain he was dragging on sand or grass or what?
Sand.
Then what happened?
Once he got her by the grass, he went up and got her car.
When you say he, who do you mean?
Danny.
And do you know how he happened to have her keys or be able to operate the car?
I did not.
So when the defendant operated the car, what course of action did he take at this time?
He pulled the car onto the grass, closer to Olivia's body.
And then after he got close to Olivia's body, what happened next?
He got out and opened the trunk.
Do you know who opened the trunk?
I don't remember for sure.
And up to this point, had you touched the body of Olivia up to the point we've spoken about now?
I did not.
Now, at this point, did you touch the body of Olivia McKay?
I did not.
So what happened next?
After the trunk was opened, he grabbed her under her arms and tried to put her into the trunk.
Could he do it?
Not by himself.
So what happened?
He asked me to help him.
And what did you do?
I helped him.
Physically, what did you do to move the body of Olivia McKay with him?
I grabbed her legs.
And when you grabbed Olivia's legs, what happened then?
I helped him put her into the trunk.
Were there items in Olivia's trunk?
There was.
And what happened to the items that were in Olivia's trunk when you and the defendant moved her into the trunk?
We pushed him further back into the trunk.
And how was Olivia situated in the trunk?
Laying down.
Was she on her back or on her face?
On her side.
And was her head faced towards the driver's side or the passenger side?
Passenger side.
After Olivia's body was placed in the trunk, what happened next?
Danny gave me the keys.
And when the defendant gave you the keys, what happened next?
I got in the car and drove.
Mr. Cook, did you know that Olivia McKay was dead when you assisted in this way you've spoken about?
I did.
Why would you help put Olivia's body in the trunk and then drive that car away?
Because I was trying to help Danny.
And when you drove, how was it determined what route or where you would go?
Danny told me where to turn.
Where did Danny go in the vehicle?
Passenger seat.
At this point in time, did you have anything on your hands that would prevent either fingerprints or DNA or any physical evidence to be detected?
I did not.
And at this point in time, did the defendant have anything on his hands that would cause those
Objection,
things?
Your Honor. I think it goes outside his knowledge of whether objects that are on the hand could prevent it. I think he can say whether someone had something on their hands, but whether those objects would prevent fingerprints, DNA, I think is outside of the scope of his knowledge.
I'll rephrase the question.
All right.
Happy to rephrase. Did you have any gloves on your hands at this time?
I did not.
And did the defendant have any gloves on his hands?
He did not.
As you are driving, what do you remember about the route that you were instructed to drive from the park at the band shell?
We drove over Pepsi Hill, and when I got to Gateway, he told me to turn left.
When you turn left, that would take you south.
That's correct.
And when you drove there, where'd you go next?
We turned right,
Do you know what street you turned right on?
Washington Road,
And when you turned right on Washington Road, what did you pass that were landmarks to you?
Bradford.
Bradford High School?
That's correct.
And what else did you pass that was a landmark to you?
Walmart.
During the period of time that you're driving, what, if anything, is the defendant saying to you about why this has happened?
Nothing.
Have you asked the defendant what was happening?
I did.
When's the first time you said to your best friend, what is going on here?
When I first walked up to him
Walked up to him where?
on the beach,
Before Olivia was moved?
after she was moved.
Before she was in the trunk?
That's correct.
And when you asked, how do you remember asking it?
What's going on? What are you doing?
And were you the same flat tone of voice you just used when you said that?
No, sir.
How were you expressing yourself?
I was concerned and confused.
And what did the defendant answer you at that point?
I don't remember.
So when's the next time that you and he had any conversation about why this had happened?
When we were driving,
When you were driving with Olivia in the car, in the trunk?
after.
After her body was no longer in the trunk?
That's correct.
Okay. So during the period of time that you're driving and Olivia's body is in the trunk, what is the defendant doing?
Looking through the car,
When you say looking through the car, physically, what is he doing?
he has his sleeves pulled over his hands and he's looking in the glove compartment in the middle console.
Did he touch some items in there?
He did.
Do you know if he was able to keep the sleeves so that they managed to prevent him from touching all the items?
I do not.
And when the defendant went through the glove compartment, where did the items go that were in the glove compartment, if you know?
Any items that he took out were either put in the back seat or by his feet.
What else did the defendant do other than look through the glove compartment?
He threw Olivia's phone out the window.
Had Olivia's phone been with her or left in the car, if you know?
I do not remember.
And where would you estimate that the phone was thrown out the window, if you can even estimate that?
Somewhere along Green Bay Road.
And who threw the phone out the window?
Danny.
What, if anything, can you say about whether the defendant was able to get in the phone?
He couldn't get the password.
So how long after you began this drive would you say that Olivia's phone was no longer in that vehicle?
10 minutes down Green Bay Road.
After you got to Green Bay Road, where were you instructed to head next?
I don't.
Where'd you drive next? After you got up, you said you saw Walmart. Where'd you go next?
He told me to turn around.
From where?
From Walmart.
Okay.
Walmart.
And so when you turned, where'd you go to?
Back towards Green Bay Road.
Okay. When you made it back to Green Bay Road, where'd you go?
In the Racine.
Using Green Bay Road as your route?
That's correct.
When you got to Racine on Green Bay Road, are you aware of the highway the mall is on in Racine?
I am.
And did you go as far as that highway the mall is on?
No, we turned left first when we saw the mall.
And when you turned left, how far did you go?
I don't remember.
And after you turned left at that point, what happened next?
We drove down until we saw a highway.
Okay? And ultimately, did you use the same highway that the mall is on in Racine, or did you go further into Racine?
I don't know.
If you remember. Okay. So ultimately, you drove down one of the highways in Racine, is that true?
Correct.
And when you drove down those highways, did the defendant tell you anything about his plan for his next plan?
He said that he needed to get near Wi-Fi
Why?
so he could mess Wi-Fi
And why did he need to get near Wi-Fi?
so he could use his phone.
And who was he trying to contact?
Jamari,
And who is Tamaray?
his baby's mother,
And where was Tamaray currently at that time?
in the hospital.
And what hospital was she in?
Wheaton Franciscan, if I'm correct.
Okay, and is that a hospital in Racine?
It is.
So you were headed towards that same direction, correct?
Yes,
And did you make it to a place that had Wi-Fi?
we did.
And was that, where was Olivia's body at the time that you first came into a place that had Wi-Fi?
In the trunk.
What did you do with the vehicle when you made it to that place that had Wi-Fi?
I stayed in it.
And what did the defendant do?
Got out.
And where did he go?
I don't know.
And did the defendant come back?
He did.
How long was he gone?
Between 5 and 10 minutes.
And when the defendant returned, what information did he provide you?
That Jamari already had visitors, so we couldn't go there.
So now you could not go to Wheaton Franciscan Hospital. Did the defendant direct you to some other location?
He kept giving me directions.
And where did he direct you to?
Past the mall,
Past the mall, where, and then where?
down a dark road.
And after you went down that dark road, did you come to a stop immediately, or did you have to make another turn or back up?
He told me to turn around.
And when you turned around, where'd you stop at? What do you remember about the location?
There was a red barn across the street and trees. We stopped next to the trees.
And were you on the same side of the road as the trees, or the opposite side of the road?
Same side of the road as the trees.
Where'd you pull over to? Were you on the shoulder, still on the road? Where'd you go?
We pulled into the shoulder.
And then what happened?
Then we got out of the car.
When you say we, who got out of the car?
Me and Danny.
And when you and the defendant got out of the car, what happened next?
He told me to open the trunk.
When the defendant told you to open the trunk, what did you do?
I opened the trunk.
And after you opened the trunk, what happened next?
We went to the back of the car.
Who did?
We went to the back of the car.
Okay, we meaning both of the two of you?
That's correct.
What happened next?
Danny grabbed garbage bags, and I helped him bag the upper half of Olivia McKay.
Where did he get the garbage bags from?
His backpack.
He brought a backpack into Olivia's vehicle?
That's correct.
And the garbage bags came from his backpack?
That's correct.
What, if anything else, did you notice that the defendant had with him from the backpack?
Gloves.
When you say gloves, describe what you mean.
Blue surgical gloves.
And you saw those came from the backpack?
That's correct.
Was there a backpack you recognized as belonging to the defendant?
Yes, sir.
What do you remember about the backpack?
It was a maroon backpack with a white design on the front.
One you'd seen with the defendant before?
Yes, sir.
Was it a full-size backpack or a drawstring backpack?
Drawstring backpack.
I'm going to briefly show you what's been marked first as Exhibit 15. Do you recognize whose home that is?
Yes, sir.
Whose home is that?
Patsy's.
So that's the defendant's grandma?
That's correct.
That's the location that you went to and were on the porch when Olivia picked you up?
That's correct.
And then I'm going to ask you about that picture. Do you recognize what area that's a picture of?
That's his living room.
Same person you just mentioned?
That's correct.
And then I'm going to show you this picture and ask you if you recognize what that's a picture of in terms of someone's home.
It's Patsy's house.
I'm going to show you, and those were, for purposes of the record, I apologize, exhibits first 15, 16, and 20. I'm going to show you what's been marked now as exhibit 21. I'm going to ask you if you see two objects in that picture.
I do.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this picture. I don't think there's any reason to believe that Jamari Cook knows that those specific gloves were in the home. Those were recovered on August 3rd. I don't think there's been sufficient foundation yet.
I agree that he has no way to know where they're located, but he can look at a pair of gloves and say what he knows about them.
I don't think that he has the qualifications to say they're...
He can testify as to similarities he may observe. You'd have to make a greater showing to get him to identify them.
Absolutely. Understood. So you've been shown exhibit 21, and I'm just going to ask you if those appear similar to you to anything that you've described thus far in this case.
They are similar to the gloves that Danny wore that day.
What, if anything, did you put on your hands at the time that you opened the trunk and approached Olivia's body in the trunk?
Nothing.
And after the two of you, the defendant and yourself, got to the trunk, what happened next?
I held up her upper half while he put a bag over her.
You held her upper half and the defendant put a bag over her?
That's correct.
Did he? And was the bag that the defendant put over Olivia over her top or bottom part of her body?
The upper half.
And then what happened next?
I put a bag over her lower half.
When you put that bag over her, were you wearing anything on your hands?
I was not.
When the defendant put his bag over Olivia, was he wearing anything on his hands?
He was.
And what was he wearing?
Blue surgical gloves.
After the bags were placed on Olivia, did they cover her entire body, or was there a portion of her body still uncovered?
There was a portion of her body still uncovered.
And after the two of you put bags over the body of Olivia, what did the two of you do next?
We took her out of the trunk and brought her behind the trees.
And how did you do that? How did you accomplish moving her from the trunk to behind the trees?
He held her upper half while I held her legs.
Did you carry or drag her?
Carrier.
And the two of you did that?
We did.
And to do that, did you have to proceed behind an area of bushes or trees?
We did.
And how was she laid? Was she laid face down or face up?
Face down or face up.
Face up? Okay. And at that time, after you placed Olivia's body at that location, what did the two of you do next?
Got back in the car.
And when you got back in the car, who drove at this point?
Danny.
And when the defendant drove at this point, where did the two of you proceed next?
Back to Kenosha.
And if you recall, what route did you take to get back to Kenosha, if you remember?
Green Bay Road.
After you got back to Kenosha, at some point were you on a roadway that you came to a stop on?
Washington Road.
And was that in Kenosha that you were back to when you came to a stop?
It was.
Who made a decision to make a stop there?
Danny.
And up to this point, had the defendant told you any plans he had for what has now resulted? There's a murdered young girl and you're in a vehicle of hers. So has he told you anything about his current plans?
He was going to flip the car.
When you say flip, what does that mean?
So.
And did he have an idea how he was going to accomplish that, meaning the defendant?
I don't remember.
So, at the point you stop on Washington Road, what happens next?
He tells me we got to clear out the car.
Who says that?
Danny.
And so do the two of you get out of the car?
We do.
What happens next?
He opens the trunk and we go to the back of the car.
Okay, who goes to the back?
We both do.
And then what happens?
We start taking our stuff out of the trunk.
Who does that?
We both do.
And at the point that the defendant takes that stuff out, what, if anything, is he wearing on his hands?
Gloves.
At the point he is driving the vehicle during this period of time, what, if anything, is the defendant wearing on his hands?
Gloves.
And what are you wearing on your hands?
Nothing.
Then what happens?
We go through her stuff.
And when you go through her stuff, what do you mean? Are you thorough, or is this a quick look? What are you doing?
I'm just looking in the zippers, and if we don't see anything, throwing it into the ditch on the side of the road.
And what about the bags themselves? What happened to them?
They were thrown on the side of the road.
What do you remember being in these bags in general?
Clothes.
And was there anything that you remember of value from the bags?
I don't think so.
Were both bags thrown? One bag thrown?
Multiple bags.
And were the items kept in the bags or thrown out of the bags? What happened?
The bags were thrown open, so the items came out of the bag.
Got it. After those bags were thrown from the vehicle or thrown from the location, what happened next?
We got back in the car.
And who was driving at this point?
Danny.
And at that point, where did Danny, the defendant, drive next?
Tomatoes.
When the defendant got to Patsy Tate's home, what happened then?
He parked down the street.
And what happened then?
Told me to bring the car back tomorrow and drive it back to Kaylee's.
Did you do that?
I did.
And when you last saw the defendant that night, where was he?
At Modest.
Where'd you proceed next?
Back to Kaylee's.
Who was driving now?
I was.
And when you drove at this point, where did you park the car in connection to Kaylee's house?
Down the street from Kaylee's house.
Do you have in general an estimate on the time that this was at this moment?
Around midnight.
And at the point that you parked the car there, what'd you do with the keys?
Put them in my pocket.
And where'd you go next?
Kaylee's.
When you got to Kaylee's, what did you do?
Talked to Dizzy.
And what is Dizzy's real name?
Daryl Crandall.
Now, had Dizzy ever been at the lakefront that night?
Who was not.
Do you know of a person named Andrew Crom?
I do.
Was that person at the lakefront that night?
He was not.
And who is Andrew Crom to you or the defendant, his best friend?
He's a kid in the neighborhood we used to get into it with a lot.
Get into it like with fights or disputes?
Yes.
And what, if anything, can you say about the defendant and whether he's used the name Andrew Crom before in situations that have been trouble?
Whenever we would go car hopping or do anything illegal, if we ever got caught, he would say that his name was Andrew Crom.
And what is car hopping?
Stealing from people's cars.
All right, Mr. Cook, I'm going to show you an interaction on the overhead and just ask you if you recall this. First of all, did you have a particular Facebook Messenger name that you used back in July of 2017?
YPG Jado.
One more time.
YPG Jado.
YPG Jado, so that would be letters Y, P, and G. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then Jado, Jaydoe. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And what was, if you remember, what's the defendant's Facebook Messenger name of that period of time?
DG Youngin.
DG Youngin, so the letters D and G, and then Youngin, Youngin.
Correct.
And do you recall a Facebook Messenger interaction with the defendant in the early morning hours after you and he had returned to Kenosha after leaving Olivia's body in Racine?
I do.
So I'm just going to ask you if this is an accurate reflection of that Facebook contact. Do you see, I'm at the one that says, the first one that says author JPG J Doe. Do you see that one?
I do.
And if I indicated that if we take UTC time, that's 3:12 in the morning. Does that look accurate to you?
It does.
And then it says, my fucking back is killing me. Do you see that?
I do.
Who sent that message?
I did.
And who did you send it to?
Danny.
And why was your back hurting you at that time?
I'm moving Olivia McKay's body.
So you wanted to share that with him, that your back was hurting from moving her body?
Yes.
And did the defendant respond to you?
He did.
What did he say?
Why?
And then did you do some emojis for him at that point?
I did.
And then at that point, do you say, I don't know?
Yeah.
And then does he say, me neither, LOL, lots of love, laugh out loud, or lots of love?
Yes.
Which one does he mean there, if you know?
Laugh out loud.
Calls for speculation.
Best friends.
Pardon me?
Best friends.
Well, I'm going to sustain the objection. Let the jury decide.
So do you go on to tell the defendant, me and Dizzy went for a walk and smoked about halfway through our walk, halfway through our walk back, my shit started spamming?
That's correct.
Okay, are you referring to your back?
Yes.
And then does he say your back, and then he says damn P?
That's correct.
Is he referring to you when he says damn P? Is that a name he uses for you?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you say, yeah, dude, and then do you describe again how it feels, the back injury?
It does. I do.
Okay, and then does he describe to you an ailment that he has? I feel you, my hand keep itching, fucking mosquitoes everywhere.
He does.
And then do you respond, I swear my ankles bit the fuck up? Do you say that?
I do.
Are you guys comparing mosquito bites here?
We are.
And where did you and he receive those mosquito bites hours earlier?
In the trees where we hid McKay's body.
Is that a true and accurate copy of the discussion that you two had after leaving Olivia McKay's body over at in that road in Racine?
It is.
Mr. Cook, are you familiar with the...
Hold on a second.
I apologize.
Does anybody need just a 5-minute break? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Cook, are you familiar with the phrase, grip a steamer?
I am.
And what does that mean?
Obtain a stolen vehicle.
So what is a steamer then?
Stolen car.
Had the defendant spoken to you previously about stealing cars?
He had.
How recently before July 23rd had the two of you spoken about stealing cars?
Weeks.
And what had the defendant said about them?
That we need to start making some money.
And this was a way to make money?
That's correct.
On July 23rd, or prior to July 23rd, did the defendant give you any information about that he would be stealing Olivia McKay's car?
He did not.
Or be stealing a car from somebody he was hooking up with on Meet Me?
He did not.
Through your contacts with the defendant, do you know a person named Samantha Whitaker?
I do.
And who is that?
One of Danny's ex-girlfriends.
And when were they? When were they boyfriend and girlfriend, as far as you know?
On and off for a couple years.
And what about a woman named Amanda Hanneman?
On and off for a couple years.
Also a girlfriend of someone's?
Danny's.
Okay. And then what about Sarah Rantanen?
I do remember.
And who's that?
One of his ex-girlfriends. Now, you indicated that the defendant told you to come pick him up
the next day after Olivia McKay was killed. Did you do that?
I did.
And approximately what time of day? I'm not asking you to be exact, but about what time of day did you go get him, or did you meet up with the defendant?
Early in the morning.
And how did you meet up with him? How did you come to be in the same place on that morning?
I drove back in Olivia's car.
And at the point that you drove back, what happened then?
He got in the car.
He meaning the defendant?
That's correct.
Did anyone else get in the car?
No, they did not.
And at that time in the morning, where did the two of you go?
To the hospital in Racine.
Who drove?
I did.
And when you drove the vehicle to the hospital in Racine, where did you go when you got there?
We parked in the parking lot and went upstairs.
Who parked the vehicle?
I did.
And up until now, did you have anything on your hands during this trip?
I do not remember.
What about the defendant?
I do not remember.
All right, so when you got to the hospital, what happened?
We went inside,
Who went inside?
both of us.
And then what happened?
We went back outside.
And when you went outside, about what time would you estimate it was? Very rough estimate.
I don't remember. About an hour after I went and picked him up.
And when you went back outside, who drove now?
Danny.
And where did the two of you drive at this point?
To McDonald's.
Okay. And at this point, were any of you wearing anything on your hands, if you recall?
We were both wearing a glove
Okay. And where did you obtain those gloves?
from the hospital.
Okay. Then what happened?
We, from McDonald's, went to Raven Decker's house
And where was Raven Decker living in general?
in apartment complex, I think is either that or at some hotel
Was it in, what area was it in?
in Mount Pleasant.
Okay. And who drove to that location?
I did.
And where had you driven from? Where were you coming from, if you know?
McDonald's.
So when you arrived at that location, who was with you?
Danny.
Anyone else?
No.
And when you got there, who did you interact with, or who was present?
Danny, Raven Decker, and a guy named something Woodland. I can't remember his first name.
Okay. And what was the purpose of visiting Raven Decker, if there was one?
He was trying to sell the car to Raven.
Was the defendant trying to sell the car to other individuals?
I don't remember.
Okay. Was the defendant's girlfriend still in the hospital when you went to Wheaton Franciscan?
She was.
And what, if anything, was said about whether she would be able to assist in selling the vehicle?
I don't remember.
Then what happened? Did this person, Raven Decker, buy the vehicle?
She did not.
And instead, what happened?
She told me to move the car.
And did you do that?
I did.
And where'd you move it to?
The apartment building across the street.
Then what happened?
I walked back.
After you walked back, what happened next?
We talked to Raven, and I threw stuff that I found in the carway
Where'd you throw it?
into the dumpster outside her house.
What do you remember throwing away?
A pair of shoes and other loose objects I can't remember.
Why'd you throw those items away at that time?
To clean the car out.
Then what happened?
We went back to Kenosha.
And who went back to Kenosha at that time?
Me, Danny, and Raven.
And how did Raven get there?
A friend came and picked her up.
So how many cars went back to Kenosha?
2.
And who drove each car, if you know?
I drove Olivia's car, and Raven's friend drove his car.
And when you drove the car on these occasions, did you have anything on your hands?
Yes, I had a glove.
Okay. And when the defendant was in the car, which car was he in as you came back to Kenosha?
Olivia's.
And when he was in the car, did the defendant have anything on his hands?
A glove.
At that point, what happens next?
We parked the car down by the lake.
And what happens to the car?
Leave it there.
Where do you go next?
Tomatoes.
After you go to Mata's, when's the next time you drive the car?
We don't.
So when you say we, the defendant also does not drive the car to your knowledge?
Not that I know of.
And where was the car left in general?
Down by the lake.
Had you had discussions with the defendant about why he had ended the life of Olivia McKay?
I did.
And why did the defendant tell you that he ended her life?
For the car.
Mr. Cook, why did you keep helping the defendant throughout this whole time period?
I didn't want him to get in trouble.
You knew someone was dead, right?
Yes.
And yet you still thought it was most important to make sure that your best friend didn't get in trouble?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because I didn't trust a lot of people, and I trusted Danny.
So tell me what kind of best friend this is. Describe to me your friendship with him.
We basically spent every day together. If I wasn't there, he'd show up. He'd more often than not have stayed at my mom's house. When I wouldn't have somewhere to go, I could go wherever he was, and if he didn't have somewhere to go, he'd come to my house.
If the defendant had no place to go, and you had a warm bed available to you where he was not welcome, did that ever happen in your time period?
It did.
And what did you do? If you had a warm bed available but he wasn't welcome and he did not, what did you do?
Stayed where he was.
So what kind of places are we talking?
In cars, porches, people's houses.
Even though you had a warm bed available to you?
That's correct.
How many times do you think you did that?
I don't remember. Multiple times.
How many?
Multiple times, I don't remember.
So, after you no longer use the car anymore, did you manage to get back up to the hospital where the defendant was having a child?
We did.
And when did that happen in relation to the last time you saw the vehicle, if you know?
I can't remember if it was the same day or the next day.
Okay? And how did you get to the hospital now?
Jamari's friend came and picked us up from Wendy's.
And then where did you stay for the next few days?
At the hospital with Danny and Jamari.
And ultimately, did you leave that hospital?
I did.
And how'd you get home?
My mom, or Danny's parents.
Okay. And when you got home, did you see the defendant again before the date of his arrest?
I did not.
So this is a guy that is a friend of yours. You see him almost every day. Is that because he just had a child?
What do you mean?
Why haven't you seen him now for the last several days?
Because he's been staying up at the hospital.
Okay. And so I'm going to turn your attention now to August 3rd. Where were you staying by then?
At Kaylee's house.
Okay. And that was your girlfriend at the time?
That's correct.
And was that a house that the defendant was welcome in or not welcome in?
It was not.
And when you... So, did you come into contact with the defendant on August 3rd?
I did.
And how did you come in contact with him on that day?
The night before, I had ended up staying at my mom's house. And I woke up, me and Dizzy were sitting on the couch. We woke up, and I had gotten a message from Danny saying that the police were looking for him at his grandma's house.
So, why did that cause you to link up with him?
to try and keep him from getting arrested.
And that was something you were going to try to help him do?
That's correct.
So what was the plan? How were you going to try to keep him from getting arrested?
Find somewhere out of state for him to stay.
And where'd you go?
Susie ended up picking us up, and we drove to Waukegan.
So when you say Susie, what is Susie's last name?
Bogdala.
All right. And ultimately, was the defendant arrested that day?
He was.
So if the plan was to get him out of state, what happened?
We drove back to pick up Jamari, and when we saw the police across the street, we turned and went to Lincoln Park. When we got to Lincoln Park, Danny said that he was just going to turn himself in. I told him, would you like to see my mom before you turn yourself in? He said he would, and we drove to my mom's house.
Okay. And so were you headed to your mom's house before the defendant was to turn himself in?
No.
No? Where'd you head next?
From the park, when he said he was going to turn himself
Yeah.
in, we said we were going to my mom's house, yeah. And
So
we-
is that where you headed?
Yes.
And then what happened?
We went inside my mom's house.
And then what happened?
I went back outside because I had forgot my phone in the car.
Okay. And what happened then?
I saw police outside, and I kept walking, got my phone out of the car, and when I closed the door, they told me to get on the ground.
Okay. And did they ask you to tell them if a certain person was around?
They did.
Who were they referring to?
Danny,
That's the defendant.
that's correct.
And what did you do next?
I told him that he was in the house.
And was the defendant taken into custody at that time?
He was.
And you saw that occur?
I did.
And that was August 3rd, is that right?
That's correct.
At that point, did anybody take you into custody?
They did not.
Were you at your mom's house at that moment?
I was.
So, Mr. Cook, you're at your mom's house, and do the police all leave, or do some police remain?
All of the police remained that didn't drive in the car to take Danny to the police station.
And at some point, did somebody have a conversation with you about talking to the police?
They did.
Okay. Did they search your mom's house?
They were waiting on a warrant.
Okay. And did somebody have a conversation with you?
They did.
And what in general were you told or asked?
I asked if I would come down to the police station for questioning.
And what did you decide to do?
Come down to the police station.
Did you get arrested to do that?
I did not.
So how did you come to get down to the police station?
My mom drove me to the police station.
So who came with you to the police station?
My mom, my stepmom.
Are these the closest people to you in terms of folks who are not, under the age of 20 in your life?
Yes.
So when you got to the police station, were you put under arrest?
I was not.
And did you talk to some law enforcement officers?
I did.
And had you and Danny had some discussions about what you and the defendant were going to say if you were asked about Olivia and Olivia's car?
We did.
And when were those discussions? When did you guys talk about that?
When he told me the police were looking for him.
So were you in Lincoln Park, or were you in the car? Where were you?
We were at Columbus Park, across the street from my house.
So how soon before he was arrested did you and he have that conversation?
About an hour.
Hour? And what was the agreement on what the two of you would say?
That I got into an argument with my girlfriend's stepdad, and ended up going to his house. And he said he was supposed to meet up with a female, and she never showed up.
Okay. And so when you first spoke to these officers, where were your mom and your stepmom?
Sitting next to me.
Sitting next to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what did you tell the officers at that time?
What me and Danny had agreed on.
So the story you just mentioned?
Yes, sir.
Was that story true?
It was not.
Then at some point, how long would you say that went? Just your roughest estimate. How long would you say that discussion took place?
5 minutes.
And after that 5-minute discussion, what happened next?
They left the room.
Meaning the officers?
That's correct.
And who was left in the room?
Me and my mom's wife.
And did those two individuals tell you anything about, did they give you any advice or tell you anything?
They told me if I wasn't being completely honest to tell the truth.
Then what happened?
The police came back and said that they wanted to talk to me privately.
And what happened then?
My mom and my mother's wife told the police that I had agreed to be honest.
Then what happened?
They took me back into the interrogation room.
And who was present in that interrogation room as far as you remember?
Me and two police officers.
And at that point, did you tell, what did you tell the officers?
That I was going to be honest.
Were you honest?
I was not.
So what did you say that wasn't true?
That I wasn't at the lake.
And why did you say you weren't at the lake?
Because I didn't want them to know that I knew what happened.
Why?
Because I didn't want to tell on Danny.
You knew Danny was in custody, right?
I did.
So, did the officers tell you something that caused you to change your mind about that at some point?
They told me that Danny was down at the lake telling them what happened.
Okay. And what did you think that meant?
That Danny was telling them the truth about what happened.
So what did you do then?
I told them that I was at the lake.
And when you told them you were at the lake, so let me just get this straight. First you told them the girl never showed up, correct?
Correct.
And then you told them that the girl did show up?
Correct.
But that no one went to the lake? Is that what you're saying?
I told them that Danny and Olivia may have went to the lake, but I did not.
And then ultimately they told you, Danny's already telling us that what happened and he's at the lake, and so you chose to then say what?
That I was at the lake.
Were you at the lake?
I was.
And so why did you finally tell him that?
Because I figured Danny was telling the truth.
So after you told that you were at the lake, what did you tell the officers? Did you tell them what happened?
No.
Why? What did you tell them that still wasn't true?
That we had ended up leaving and they dropped me back off at my girlfriend's house.
Was that true?
It was not.
Why'd you lie about that?
I didn't want them to know that I knew what happened.
Why?
Because I didn't want to tell on Danny.
Okay, so once you thought Danny was telling the truth, what did you change, or what happened then?
I told them that I was there.
And when you told him you were there, did you still tell him a few lies about what happened?
I did.
So what did you lie about?
What had happened that day.
Okay, meaning what?
What I saw. What happened at the lake.
Okay. Did you lie about whether you touched the body?
I did.
Did you lie about whether you went to Racine?
I did.
So, if you thought Danny was already telling the truth, why'd you lie about those things?
I didn't want to have to tell him. I didn't want to talk about what had happened.
Mr. Cook, during the period of time that this incident occurred, you had a Facebook account?
I did.
And you've identified what your Facebook account was, is that correct?
I did.
And I accurately stated that, is that right?
You did.
And during that period of time, during the period of time when you were talking to law enforcement on August 3rd, did you have a phone?
I did.
And how had you gotten that phone?
I had gotten it from Mata.
Okay. And when you got that phone from Mata, that's Patsy Tate?
That's correct.
Why did you need to get a new phone or a different phone from Mata?
I don't remember if I had broken my phone or if I had forgotten the password, but I couldn't get into it.
You couldn't get in your phone anymore?
That's correct.
And so what happened to that phone?
I don't remember.
So you didn't have the old phone anymore?
I don't.
And as to the phone that you had that had belonged to Mata, did you provide law enforcement information as to where that was located?
I did.
And were they able to retrieve that phone to the best of your knowledge?
They did.
And was that passcode protected?
It was.
And was that a code that they had to force you to give up, or did you voluntarily give up your code?
They came into the room with a notebook and a pen and asked if I could give them the password, and I did.
Mr. Cook, when you found that the defendant had brought a backpack along on this particular incident, you believe that the defendant was living or staying at Patsy Tate's, correct? Yes?
Yes,
And would be back at Patsy Tate's?
that's correct.
Was it odd or out of the ordinary for him to have a backpack in those circumstances where he was coming back to the same place?
It was.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Yeah. I think we'll break at this point, and let me ask that you return at 1:45. And is that convenient for everyone? All right, and please don't watch, listen, or read about the case, and don't discuss the case with anyone at all. See you in an hour.
You can go upstairs.
Yeah, I
to the
would-
library.